Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. I am Maxwell Baumbach, and I am your lead host this evening. As unfortunately, Nathan Grubel is sick, so he's not able to join us. He will be back in the near future, though. We're wishing him well. I think he's still got his column in the works too, so stay tuned for that. You're not going to miss it. Not going to miss a beat from Nathan otherwise. But I'm Maxwell Baumbach. I'm joined at this time by Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing awesome. Happy New Year to you, Maxwell. I hope that you had a safe, celebration.
Yeah.
I was very boring, but the
Mm-hmm.
older I get, the less I care about New Year.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. My wife and I were talking about the other day, and I was like, I think this is the least I've ever cared about New Year's.
Yes.
Like the just lowest effort. Did not put in any work to anything except for basketball, which I
Yes,
put a lot of work
absolutely.
into. And
Yeah.
we're really excited because this is a fun episode. We've been talking a lot about college basketball lately. And so is everybody, because it's easy, because I feel like the narrative of the draft tends to flow through college basketball because historically that's what it's done, and that's what it's been. But we're in a new era, and there are a lot of players outside of the NBA playing professionally, whether that be abroad or domestically. So we are going to focus on some of the best prospects for the 2023 NBA draft that are not playing college basketball. Before we get into that, make sure you're subscribed to the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. Rate and review. It helps us a ton. So if you leave a 5-star review, that does wonders for us with the search algorithms, and really helps keep the lights on over at No Ceilings. So make sure to do that. So let's get into it. We're going to lead off with the guy that a lot of people think has a chance to hear his name called on draft night. And that, of course, is Victor Wembanyama, playing for Metropolitans. Yeah, I think he's got a shot. So he is the number one on basically every mainstream site. He was the number one on the last No Ceilings composite big board. There's been a lot said about Victor Wembanyama, but I feel like a lot of people watched the G League Ignite games and were like, he's number one. And that's been the end of the discussion in some ways. Yeah. So we got into some recent Victor film. So let's go through that. What's kind of stood out to you in the recent Victor games that might be different, or just things that you're starting to notice more as you dive back in?
Yeah, man. So I got a page full of notes, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but I don't know, man. I feel like there's so much to his game that a lot of people have put a lot of emphasis on that I don't think is fully developed yet. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
Like right now, obviously he's super tall. We affectionately refer to him as the blue alien from Space Jam. Mavs draft. Richard, he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, appreciate the the shout out about the blue alien from Space Jam." Like, everyone has made that reference about him, and it's just so fun to see that. But his length, I noticed a lot, and this might shock you, has affected passing lanes as well as blocking shots. And I feel like that is not something that really gets emphasized a lot with him. We think about him as a drop big who's capable of switching out and things like that. But I was really encouraged with the way that even when he's away from the ball and the action's happening away from him, how willing he is to kind of like shoot passing lanes and be a menace in that aspect, because I feel like it's easy for bigs to say that's not really my thing, and to like let the ball swing and then prepare and let the action come to him. But he's kind of preventing it from happening in the first place with using his length. It was fun to watch him go up against Ishmael Kamagate, who I was a really big fan of last year. It was, and it looked like he had that game circled in red on his calendar, because he has some good moments against him. One thing I want to ask you, Maxwell, is the 3-point shot. This is what I was kind of alluding to earlier. A lot of people are talking about him as a center. I don't know kind of positionally how you classify him. This is like really hard for a lot of people to do, and it might be a futile exercise anyway. But I'm kind of getting away from looking at him as a center. You know what I mean?
I would agree. I think he's probably playing the 4 initially.
Yeah,
the same way that Evan Mobley has. Like
I don't even see the 3.
That's interesting. I guess why not? You know what I mean? Like, I think it depends.
He's got the handle
at the 4. Yeah, I think depending on your lineup, if that's what you want to do, like, you could 100% do that. Like you look at a team like, let's say Utah, who's like not in position to win the lottery, but let's say Utah wins the lottery, like you could play him Markkanen and Olynyk, or like you could play like him Markkanen Vanderbilt, or you could play Vanderbilt Olynyk Wemby. Like there's ways that you could do it where he would ostensibly be your 3. So yeah, I think if you just want to view him as a straight up forward, that's fine. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think especially now that the passing has gotten better.
Yes.
Which I think is one of the biggest things for him is that just his understanding of leverage. Like we talk about leverage all the time, but like it is such an important thing for guys that are going to have the ball in their hands a lot, is to just have that ability to recognize when help is coming and take advantage of it. And his recognition is coming a lot faster, and his passing accuracy has gotten better. Because that was like one of my knocks on him before the season, was it felt like there would be times where he would see something develop and then like the pass just like wouldn't quite be on the mark. And it was a little concerning to me, but that's gotten a lot better. So I think as far as like wing skills, I could see that. And I think that defensively, there are ways that it works too. Like a note that I wrote down on him is that, and this is something that is a much more relevant skill for a wing than a big, is he is a very good late clock defensive option.
Yes.
Like whenever we talk about guys as late clock options, it's usually on the offensive end. But there are a few guys that I would feel more comfortable with on an island in a tough situation than Victor Wembanyama, just between his length, his agility, and his recovery tools. Like there's no way. He's very difficult to get by. And even if you get by him, he's still probably in the play just because he's so long. He's so long and he's able to move. So it, like on the rare chance that you do get by him, like it doesn't really mean anything. So yeah, I think if you want to play him at the wing, like there's some real defensive advantages that come along with that.
Yeah. And I think the big thing with me though, offensively, is I think that we're kind of talking about him as a shooter in the same lens as like a Luka Doncic, who, you know, recently has just had a historic run and a lot of praise going out to him in the NBA. But if you look at the percentage that Wembanyama has right now from deep, I don't know if you kind of look at it in that same way, where Luka isn't the most effective 3-point shooter or efficient, but he is pretty effective and people still have to respect him from that range. Wemby's 3-point shooting isn't like anything to write home about if you're just going to look at a stat sheet, right? But I'm curious if that stood out to you, is like when you're watching him, he's a threat from deep like the entire game, but efficiency wise, it's not there. And I don't know if we're at that point of the season yet where we can start pointing out like quote unquote weaknesses in his game, because I still feel like there are areas in Wembanyama's game to get better. But that was one that kind of stood out to me. I was surprised to see the numbers attached to that.
Yeah, so he's making, so this is using the Instat data, which I believe includes the 2 Ignite games. He is 33.9% from 3 on the year. So, and he's taking around 5.6 per game. I think what differentiates him from Luka is that, like, yeah, he's the guy who gets a lot of respect on the perimeter because guys know that he'll take them, and he'll take tough ones. Like he'll take them off the dribble and stuff like that, which like the defense really has to guard you when that's a thing you do. If you're somebody who hasn't watched Wembanyama, but if you're watching college basketball, think about like a Mike Miles at TCU, a guy who does not hit a great percentage from 3, but he will pull up from like well behind the line. So teams know like, well, we have to respect him because we don't want to leave him open because he can't hit him. That's sort of where Victor's at. I think the big difference, if you talk about like where Luka was pre-NBA versus Victor, about half of Luka's 3-point field goals were 3-point attempts. His final season playing for Real Madrid before he came over to the NBA, where for Victor, that number is about a quarter. Like he's taking about 17 shots per game and 5.63. So he's not totally reliant on it, and he has been so effective inside the arc. Like he's still shooting around 49% on all field goals. So the 2-point percentage is good. I don't think it's the end of the world. Like I think this percentage on this volume is ultimately really encouraging, especially considering like a year ago he was still quite a bit behind this, and generally takes bigs a little bit longer to get their shot going.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like I'm still encouraged by it, you know, like when I'm watching him shoot, even the misses, he has some pretty bad misses on the year too, like watching.
Yeah, there's some
pretty egregious shot attempts, and like you can see where the ball is going. It's just like, oh no, maybe that wasn't the right decision. But like that's why he made the team swap that he did to Metropolitans, right? So he can kind of fill his game out a little bit. And how often do we criticize college teams for not letting their star-studded recruits play in clutch minutes and experiment with the skills that they have?
Yeah, like now's the time. Like the next several years are the time for like Victor to experiment and like take those runner style one leg 3-point shots that he's taken a couple times and he hits them. So it's like, why not? Like, yeah, just do it. And their team is winning is the other thing too. Like they're winning and he is so clearly their best player. He's having one of the best seasons in the history of that league. That it's like, well, yeah, who cares? Like if he's taking these shots, that's fine. They're okay shots to take. The other thing I want to touch on with him really quick that stood out to me that I like a lot, and it kind of plays a little bit off of your passing lanes comment, but it is more sort of in the vein of big man role, is his defensive pick and roll coverage is just ludicrous.
Yeah.
Because he can block both guys' shots, and he has an ability to just play in the middle of the pick and roll in a way that like guys can't do that. Like there's other guys that
it scares the handler and the roller.
Yes,
like
you
have to account for him both actions.
There's no way to get a pass around him effectively. He can block the shot of the ball handler. If you get it to the roll man, he can still block the roll man. Like he just covers so much space. Like I talked to somebody a lot smarter than me a while ago who said, like, never think of basketball players in terms of height. Think of them in terms of like wingspan, standing reach, and how they move. So like picture like the St. Joe's mascot that's like flapping his arms the whole game. Like it's just so much size and length.
Like a sphere of influence, right?
Yes, like exactly. Like there's just the radius of Victor Wembanyama is so massive that like it's just impossible to run an effective pick and roll against him. And the number of times that I saw players either try to lob a pass over him in a pick and roll that was deflected, intercepted, or like was just so comically high that he was completely able to recover by the time it got to the big man. You can't do anything about it. It is one of the most like frustrating experiences if you're watching from the perspective of the other team, like trying to get their offense going. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's like high anxiety. One thing though, like as great as he is about defending the pick and roll, last note I have on him, and yes, it's a critique. I'm sorry. Is that when
no, it's important. It's important to do
exactly.
This because if he comes in and struggles in any area, like we saw with Cade, where like Cade has had some struggles out of the game. People like draft people said he was going to be perfect, and it's like I'm sure there were some people, but like at the same time, like it is important to like point out like these are things that need work. These things still need to be developed, right? These things could cause some issues here and there. So continue on with your critique because it's important.
Yeah, no problem. And I think that this is where I kind of look at him more as like a 3 or 4, probably more often, but depending on the team, like could probably give you minutes at the 3. Is that when there's action happening away from him and he's in drop coverage as the big, I notice that some of the teams that like try to outwit what the Metropolitans are doing is that they run like a lot of back screens and like off ball action away from him. And he has such a tendency that when the ball is swinging, that he wants to stay with his man that he is assigned to, that he oftentimes let people go by him and finish uncontested. So that's something that I'm interested to see if that continues on. And obviously at the next level, like if that's happening overseas and people are watching film with them, like the NBA coaches they could probably implement something similar. I don't know if that's something that stood out to you when you were watching them.
So I didn't necessarily catch that. The one defensive thing that I've noticed that I think teams have had some effect with is like screen the screener type actions. Like if there's an action where like he is screened, just the way that his body mechanics are, like it is the one thing that really trips him up from a recovery standpoint. Just because like there is so much of him, it's really hard for him to get his balance back after contact. And on offense, it shows up a little bit too. Like he can still kind of get funneled to different spots by guys. Like he is very dependent on tough shot making. So like there are going to be games where like, the shot just doesn't fall, and that's something that he has to deal with. But defensively, I think the more that you can make him have to deal with screens, whether it's like actually making contact or even just get around them, like that is one area where he can have a hard time.
I think that some of these areas too, like obviously Maxwell, like this is what I'm saying. He's got weaknesses to his game.
Mhm.
Obviously, he's still very talented, probably still going to
Yeah,
be the number one pick. Like those are areas that he can improve on like easily. Closeouts
for
instead of
sure.
jumping on every time he closes
Yeah.
out, just being like, "Hey, I'm the tallest dude on the court. Like let me just put my
Mhm.
hand up that way I don't get a pump fake and someone drives on me." Like he obviously still has recoverability, but that's just something that would make the offense have to work even harder if he didn't jump so much on a closeout. And those little cleanups will make him such even he'll be even more dangerous than what he already is, which is a scary concept.
Any final parting comments on Victor?
He is really good at basketball.
Yeah, he's great. He's good.
Yeah.
I still like him. He's still within my top 60.
Yeah,
I think
consensus
he's
top
got a real
60.
shot. So let's move on to our next guy. The man that we saw play against Victor earlier on in the year, and that is Scoot
Mhm.
Henderson with the G League Ignite. Scoot had missed a lot of time due to a facial injury, which is one of those things like I saw people being like, is he going to shut it down or whatever? It's like, I don't think so. Like, I don't think you need to load management. I think like you just don't want to get hit in the face again and have to deal
Yeah.
with like, having a facial injury. So he's back on the court. He's now hit 2 game winners in the last 3 games as
It's
of this
crazy.
evening. Scoot is ludicrous. So using the inset numbers that include the Metropolitans games. And now keep in mind that's going to submarine his averages because he only played 4 minutes in that game against Metropolitans, the second
It
one.
really drags his numbers down, yeah.
Yeah, Scoot is averaging 18.7 points per game, 5.2 assists per game, 4.3 rebounds, 1.3 assists, 3 turnovers. He is 46.2% from the field, 72.4% from the free throw line, and 44% from 3, which was a big concern for him coming to the season. He's taking 2.5 a game, so
Mhm.
not a ton, but it's certainly nothing to sneeze at either. It's solid volume for the type of player he is. He generally gets to his spots inside the arc, so can't complain. Scoot Henderson, really great start. So glad to have him back, just because like those Ignite games can be really rough when he's not out
Yep.
there spearheading the offense. What have you seen from Scoot? What's kind of standing out for you now that he's back on the floor?
He makes it difficult for me, man. Like I know that people think that having anybody ranked above, Victor Wembanyama is just like, attention seeking. But
Mm-hmm.
watching Scoot is just incredible.
He's
Like
good. Yeah.
he is so good, and the comments will continue all season long about in any other draft he would be number one. Like he's going to be dangerous. I love his mid-range game, and listening to him,
Mm-hmm.
like the players that he's like emulating. When you hear him say names like Andre Miller, which is a player that you probably like athletically, he's a fine basketball athlete, but he is not Scoot Henderson, right?
Worlds apart. Worlds apart.
Worlds but when you watch the passing, the cadence, the ability to get into the paint and finish with contact, like that is Andre Miller. And that's not a name that I would have linked to his game. But after you
Mhm.
hear that and you see how he has kind of implemented areas of that to his game, it's just incredible, And going back to the Chris Paul comment, when you watch when he gets to the elbow, it's phenomenal. Like he stops on a dime, just like everyone is going around him, and then he rises up above the recovering defense and just splashes a mid-range game. I love the ability that he shows to rebound. He's giving you one offensive rebound a game as a guard. Like, I love that. I love rebounding guards. It's just a thing about me that people just need to know. Um, he surveys the offense nicely, and when he's in a help stance, like um, he puts himself into position on defense to where he can disrupt what the offense is looking to do without losing
Mhm.
his footing to be able to recover as well. So, like a combination of all those things, like if you look at the runner, the floater, the body control, the ability to make in-air adjustments, right? Like that, the anti Andre Miller in that aspect, where he is looking more
Yeah.
like Derrick Rose and the Russell Westbrook comps that he's getting. There's just so much yin and yang to his game that makes him such a complete player. The one thing that I will say is like since he is like over a foot shorter than Wembanyama, I
Mhm.
have for the first time like in one game seen him get blocked like multiple times, and that scared
Yeah.
me against the Clippers. Like that was like
Mhm.
okay, that's a legitimate concern about his game.
Yes. Yeah. The one thing that he will never be able to change is that he is like 6'1", 6'2". Like there's
Yeah.
just nothing that he can do about that. But that said, like we've seen guys like Chris Paul, like John Morant, like put together really great seasons and spearhead really great teams and lead them really far into the playoffs. So it doesn't mean you can't do it, even in the modern league where size is king. I do think that the big thing that stuck out to me with Scoot since his comeback, and you touched it on a little bit, like when you mentioned it's like the cadence he plays with, he attacks with rhythms and paces that I feel like I have not seen before. Like his ability to just kind of like slow down for one step at like a really awkward speed. And it sounds like when you say this kind of stuff, generally it's something where it sounds like oh, you know, like he could injure himself or like something like that. And it's like it's not that. Like it's very controlled. It looks very safe. It's just so unique for a player who is so fast to be able to play at these tempos and rhythms going downhill that just like throw defenders so far off. Because so often when you see a player's attacking footwork, it's either like I hesitate and then I burst, or I'm just bursting or whatever. We're like, the speed at which Scoot does it is so unconventional that it really throws off defenders. And I haven't seen guys move like Scoot Henderson. Like a lot of the times, like you see a guy do an attacking move and it's like, oh, that's like an attacking move that Russell Westbrook would do, or that John Wall would do, or that like, this is how like John Morant would get to the rim, or whoever, or Allen Iverson, even if you want to go like a little more herky jerky with it. Like Scoot has his own style in terms of how he gets to the basket, and it makes it so difficult to anticipate.
Yeah, and then, I mean, if you even want to look at more contemporary guards, right, like Tyrese Halliburton and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like those
like
are the type
pace-heavy guys.
Exactly, right? And you see that Scoot is balancing that explosivity that he has to his game. And that's something that stands out to me, Maxwell, when I'm evaluating talent is like, what do you have that you can replicate at the next level? And what do you have that stands out compared to everybody else on the court? Like if you have a movement pattern that is all to your own, that is effective, especially in the G League, where he is going up against guys that want to play in the NBA, that are playing in the NBA, and he stands out just in terms of movement, that's incredible. Like that's what makes it so hard for me just to give the city to Victor Wembanyama, because like as much as he looks like a unique player all to his own, which he does, like the exact same thing can be said for Scoot. It's just that the comment that everyone's going to keep throwing out there, it's like, well, he's, you know, got a foot and a half, you know, short of Wembanyama. So like that's what the line of demarcation is between these two players. But again, Scoot, like he's strong. He finishes through contact, the Euro step into the offhand in the center layup that just looks impossible to block that he does. I mean, I could keep going on and on. Like he shouldn't be able to make the passes that he does. I don't know why his teammates don't always have their hands up whenever he plays. Like these turnovers that I see,
frustrating. They get like credited to him.
Yes, exactly. And it's just like, well, if this dude had his hands up and was ready for the pass, and like you would think that 10, 12 games into the season that they would be expecting these things, they still have their hands down, and it drives me nuts, man.
Yeah, I remember like the first time I played with like a point guard that had like a ton of like style and like unique passing to his game. Like he told me, because I was like a big, like he was like, oh, if I have the ball, always be ready to catch the ball. Like if I have it, like you might have it a second later, like be ready. And I feel like someone's got to have that same talk with the other guys on the Ignite, because yeah, like his turnovers look rough. Like if you're coming in from the outside, it's like, well, okay, 5.2 assists to 3 turnovers. Like I'd kind of like to see that turnover number come down or the assist number go up. And it's like, yeah, like the Ignite, like they've done a pretty good job, I feel like, of getting a lot more like ancillary shooting on their roster, especially like this year than last. Like last year, those guys were really thrown to the wolves. Whereas this year, like, there is more of that. So I like the assist number, if you want to quibble with it, maybe you could, but like also he just doesn't like, he plays off ball a little bit more than you might expect if you're not watching the games. But with the turnovers, yeah, like a lot of them are ones that are credited to him that I don't think are bad passes, but also like defenses do really load up to him, especially depending who else is on the court. Like there are lineups where teams know like some of these guys can't make us pay, and we're able to just really load up on him. So I'm not concerned about like his turnover to assist numbers, especially compared to like some of the other people that will not talk about it on this show necessarily, but like there's a lot of guys that have assist problems this year and like have turnover problems, and like Scoot's not one of them. Like I'm not sweating these numbers at all. Do you have like a concern about that at all, or no?
No, and that's what I'm saying. Like the turnovers, when you watch, like he is the engine of this team, and you talked about like
Mhm.
the adding, the addition of ancillary shooting. The same could be said about the playmaking too. When you got Leonard Miller, who's growing as a 4 and a 5, and we're going to talk about him
Mhm.
later. He handles, City Sissoko handles, Jenkins handles. There are a lot of
Yes.
ball handlers, and although there is an increase in shooting, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is the best floor spacing team in terms of efficiency
Mhm.
either, right? So Scoot showing that he's a willing shooter is great. The pressure that he puts on the rim is phenomenal. His hang time, phenomenal. I don't know if Wembanyama is just worlds ahead of this guy. And it makes it hard, man, because I try to watch and I try to get it, and I'm just like, I just can't quit Scoot, man. Like he's incredible.
Yeah. So let's say we were able to run like 100 simulations of the
Yeah.
future.
Oh boy.
What percent of the time does Scoot Henderson have a better career than Victor Wembanyama? Because I think it's
Future.
probably a higher percentage than some people would want to admit.
I would say
I
like
think it's probably like
comfortably
30 to 35.
35 is what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, like comfortably 35. I would say upwards of like if the to the point to where I'm starting like am I just like kind of trying to buy into a narrative or something like that
Mhm.
when I get to 45. It definitely wouldn't say 50, but I would
Yeah.
say like comfortably 35, 40 okay. I start getting uncomfortable when I get to
Mhm.
like 43, 45%.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
because the thing for me too is still just like, how dumb do you feel in the simulations where Victor is the better player? You know what I mean? And that does
Yeah.
matter. Like people want to pretend it
Dude, it's
doesn't,
huge. Yeah.
but it does matter. Like it does matter if you take Scoot 1 and Victor is better. And it's like, oh yeah, in the modern NBA, you picked a guy who was like a foot and 2 inches shorter than him. Like that reflects really bad if that plays out that way. But I do
Yeah.
think that like the number of outcomes where Scoot ends up better it's not nothing. It's
Yeah.
definitely not nothing.
And Wemby has entered. You have to take him territory. Like the same thing
Yeah.
with Zion Williamson and other greats before him. And
Mhm.
and for the most part, like when you hit that territory, the success rate is pretty good once you get to that. You have to
Yeah.
take him territory.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people are freaked. It's like the same thing with Zion, right? People were just like freaked out that they never seen a guy with a body like that before. And I don't
Yeah,
know, like you look at like him, you look at Jokic, and it's like this is like a great era for weird bodies in the NBA. Like this is a great era to
absolutely.
just take a guy and be like, we'll figure it out. So,
Yeah,
um, anything else on Scooter? Are we ready to move on to our next point of conversation here?
he's also good at basketball.
Yeah. So this is gonna get. I think this is where we might get not a little testy, but I think we might have some disagreements. We're going
Yeah,
to talk about
I just
the
want you to know
OTE
I love
methods.
you first and foremost,
Yeah,
Maxwell. I
I know. I
love
love
you.
you too.
You're my
Everything
buddy.
that's said here, like this is strictly basketball. Like none of this
It's a
is
safe
personal.
space.
That said, you were one of the 5 dumbest people. No, I'm just kidding. So we're gonna talk about the Thompson twins. So let's start with the men Thompson. So I've got my column coming out Tuesday,
Yeah.
and I'm
Oh
shaking up
boy.
my big board quite a bit. And I'm getting up at 4 a.m. tomorrow to start like working on this column, but also to like figure out what I'm doing with this board. I
It's due
look,
tomorrow. Like you're not allowed to change it
yeah,
moving
yeah,
forward.
exactly.
Like
Like
this
I've
is
got to
it.
it's got to get done. So, um, with Amen Thompson, I want to start by talking about like the good stuff. He is an unbelievable athlete, and like I truly believe like I'm in the camp of like he's going to be one of the best athletes in the league right away. Like I really think he's that special in terms of like his burst, how easily he gets off the floor, how he can soar through traffic, just like his quick twitch ability. Like he is a truly special athlete. He's also
Yeah.
very creative. He is
Yes.
really, really creative in terms of how he sees the game. You can tell like the fact that he's been able to play without a leash has like benefited him in so many ways. Like he's just able to make passes that like most guys would never dream of, and it kills
Hmm.
defenders. And guys are ready. Like the guys that play with him know like to be ready in the way that Scoot's teammates don't at times. Um, I think Amen Thompson like kind of has to go in the top 10 just because like guys who are 6'7" with that level of skill set and like just the way that his speed impacts his defense too. Like it's not just like, oh, he gets into the paint, he's a terror in transition, but defensively, like how quick he is off the floor to get to a block, how quickly he recognizes that he needs to get into position for a block or a steal.
Hmm.
He's a really talented player and he's hyper athletic. I am really kind of worried about some of the potential negative outcomes offensively after doing my latest OTE deep dive for him. I believe I want to get the Twitter handle right here. At Drew Gooden Suit.
Oh yeah,
by the way, just like
love him.
Great Twitter follow. Like all-time great Twitter handle. All-time great profile picture to go with the bio. If you're a draft sicko, it's a great account to follow, but also just like props for that alone. He did a Twitter thread where he has been he basically manually tracked the touch numbers for the Thompson twins through the games that he had available. So non-transition attempts at the rim. So these are attempts at the rim in the half court. And keep in mind, this is OTE competition. So this is a lot of playing against high school age opponents. Amen is 50% at the rim, 20 for 40 in those games. He's 41% of mid-range shots, which is way higher than I expected it to be. But that is a very poor number given the level of competition that he is facing. His touch is very suspect. But what concerns me more is like how he wilts against contact and how much more contact averse he is than Ausar, and how he just does everything he can to like angle himself away from it at the basket. And he does not have the touch to compensate for that. And I don't know if part of that is that like he's also a bad free throw shooter, so maybe he doesn't want to go to the free throw line or what. But like, it's a problem. He's not good at the rim in the half court against high schoolers, and he's gonna have to eventually, like, part of the sales pitch of him is like he is a walking paint touch. So you want him to be a good finisher if he's going to get to the basket, and like, is he that kind of a threat if he's struggling this badly against high schoolers? So let's start just there. The offensive concerns with Ben Thompson as a scorer. Well, let's start with him as a finisher because we'll touch on the shooting again in a minute. But how are you kind of feeling about him as a finisher at this juncture?
So first off, and I'm gonna try to eliminate when I'm talking about a man, mention Ausar and vice versa, right? Like I want to.
Yeah. We're just focused on a man right now.
So with that being said, I just want to say that I have not so far in the season at any point had either of the Thompsons within my top 5. Like I just there are a lot of things that are concerning about both players. So now that I have said that, I'll transition now and slowly talk about them in. First off, I'm just going to run through my notes, man. So offensively, very slippery, gets into the paint pretty easily is something that when I'm watching these games, like I see that, right? Like he does show good rim pressure. He does show the ability to get to his spots driving left or driving right. Like it's something that I see consistently. He's constantly pushing the break. And I feel like that, like if we can just park here for a second, Maxwell, transition, like an elite transition player, right? Euros, jump stops, spins, constantly pushing the break. I feel like this is where people are making or breaking their evals with Amen Thompson. Is saying that, yes, I acknowledge the transition. Anything outside of that, he's concerning to me. I feel like with players like Ben Simmons, with players like LaMelo Ball, for instance, right? Like those are the types of players with size, with vision, with elite, with top tier. Well, I would say Ben Simmons, top tier athleticism. Ball is a different type of athlete where he can like kind of finagle his way around a defender, but he's not like the most explosive athlete. I feel like height, athleticism, feel, and ambidexterity that he has, I feel like that in of itself is like how you mentioned, that's like top 10. Like you have to take a player like that. We know that feel and height, like having that intersection of those two things typically translates well to the NBA. Also, I don't think the NBA during the regular season is as half court oriented as a lot of people typically will make it out to be, right? Like during the regular season, I think that Amen is going to be able to find his way in an NBA offense. Now, we can have a completely different conversation about playoffs, but depending on where Amen gets drafted, that's going to be something that he's going to be working towards regardless in conjunction with his half-court finishing, right? Show some flashes of a floater and run game that have been pretty good for me. Makes exciting plays, but one thing that was discussed on the draft act that Albert and Corey talked on that I had in my notes that I'm glad that they touched on. He is pretty prone to having the ball poke loose, right? Like his handle is
Oh
a
yeah,
little
it
bit
gets
concerning.
wide at times. And I think
Yes.
part of that is like I mentioned the creativity where like he is able to string together some really jaw-dropping
Yes.
sequences, but at the same time it does seem literally like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Or like he'll enter a move and it's like, "Oh man, like I forgot I have to like have my dribble here in order to do
Mm-hmm.
this effectively." And that happens with Ausar a little bit too. I know that we're trying not to like
Yes.
group them both in, but it is like a problem in both of their games. But with a man, I think it shows up a little bit more just because he's on the ball more frequently. But yeah, the ball can get away from him, and he can also like dribble in front of himself a little more than he should as well.
And a couple more things that I'll talk about for his offense and then, hand it right back to you. I
Mm-hmm.
think that he works through his progressions really quickly. Like
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't just have one guy that he looks at when he's on offense. He has a pretty good feel of where everybody on the court is. His start and stop game, I feel like is really good. Like he shifts gears pretty easily. And I feel like with the shooting, this is obviously like the biggest weakness and,
Mm-hmm.
again, where his eval is being made broken. He's a shooter, right? Like there are players that you're just like, why aren't you taking jumpers, right? The fact that Amin is willing to take them, I think is a great thing. And I don't know if you noticed this too, but it looks like corner jumpers are a little bit more of a higher success rate for him than like pull-up jumpers or top of the key or on the wings. Like when he's in the corner, I feel like it has a higher success rate. And I haven't found any numbers that kind of justify that. Like if Drew Gooden's suit might be able to
Yeah.
hand jam some numbers in there for us, that would be cool. But watching him shoot in the corner, I feel like he's more comfortable, more confident. And I think it's actually a little bit more consistent as well. I haven't shut the door that he is the higher of the two, but after watching the game and also understanding that if we're willing to give like Wembanyama the pass because he's playing in an experimental kind of place, right? For other G guys, like
Mm-hmm.
obviously OTE is very experimental.
Yeah.
And then is trying some stuff, right? So like when he
Mm-hmm.
gets into the NBA and it's a little bit more organized and more high level coaching, I think that the raw tools that he possesses actually might translate better than what some people are anticipating.
That's all fair. I don't think you said anything that was egregious. And I think one thing I need to correct you is I mentioned like Amen is like I called him a bad free throw shooter. This year he's actually been really good. He's 81.8% at the free throw line this year. So correction, I was wrong. But last season he was very poor. I believe last year was around like 57% or something like that. Like he really struggled last year. So let's talk about the shot since you mentioned that. So my offensive concerns are like kind of like three pronged. So it's the finishing, which I mentioned, and like all that goes with it, the touch, the lack of a willingness to embrace contact. There's the handle, which like the fact that it comes kind of wide, which I don't totally sweat because I do think that like he's still just going to make a ton of plays given the fact that he is the type of athlete that he is. But he does have 3.2 turnovers per game, which like is kind of high. I do not like that he is constantly leaking out into transition on defense.
I know. I hate that too.
I get it. Like he is a very good transition player, so I understand like that is how your team can win games. That is how you create advantages. Like you are effective doing that. But like it feels so egregious, and there are times where like they give up extra baskets because he was so eager to leak out in transition that like his man got a rebound or like somebody else got a rebound and his man was totally unattended. Like he is so thirsty for transition basketball that like it costs his team at times. But let's touch on the shooting because that's the big thing. So he is 20% from three on the year, 20.8%. He's taking 2.7 per game. Teams are daring him to shoot to a comical degree. There was a game that I watched. I think it was against either the Bruins or the Holy Rams. It was one of those two games. It was because it was one of the ones that was on Instat. So I believe it was the Bruins. They were sagging so far off of him that it's like, this is not a guy who's shooting 20.8% from three. This is a guy who's shooting 20.8% from three on wide open 3-pointers. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. Like, it is deeply concerning to me that the biggest thing for Overtime Elite as a professional path line this offseason was to get the Thompsons better at shooting. And Amen did not do that. And I think his shot looks worse. I think it looks worse that he's getting it to the top. He's moving it to the right side of his body at the last second before he releases it. It's a big problem. And I'm very bothered by the fact that this was a known problem going into the year. He got, and like, that was like something I complained about last year, was that guys were like playing up on him. Like, guys were giving him the ability to just blow by him. And like, he's still getting into the paint when teams are sagging on him, which I do think speaks like very favorably to some of what he's going to be able to do in the NBA as an attacker. But he is getting just wide open threes and he's not making them. So I have very serious reservations about the, like, well, if he can even be average as a shooter, it's like, I think that might be like off the table. Like, I think we might have to be hoping that like he can become just like kind of below average, because like this thing is busted. He's got to rebuild it. Like, he has to rebuild that shot from the ground up. It is very bad right now.
And I think that is possible, right? Like, I'm not going to rule out the fact that like the jumper can't be improved. And funnily enough, not to catch any or give any strays or anything like that, he's not the worst efficient shooter that we're going to be talking about today. It's just something to keep in mind going forward.
Yeah, if we're talking percentages, there's a guy who is much worse, actually. So
surprisingly,
yeah,
but
well, like, I will say, if you want to like, sorry, just real quick, like, if you want to say like you can burn it down from the ground up and get there really quickly, a really good guy to point to would be Josh Minot, who had like a very busted jumper in college and in the G League this season is taking 3 threes per game and hitting 41% on them. So like, we just saw a guy with a horrific looking jump shot who made like 2 or 3 threes his entire college season, and one of them was banked in, like, immediately just completely rework his form. So
yeah,
like, if you want to say like, hey, you're overreacting, like, I might be, because we
I don't think that you are. Like, it's obviously concerning, right? Like, not just like on a stat sheet, but also like when you're aesthetically, it's not something that you're enjoying watching right now. Again, I don't want to use like where he is as an excuse, because I feel like OTE has done a great job within its brief time in existence of improving players, especially the younger ones, right? But I feel like the older players that they have brought in, they're kind of buying their time. And especially like when you are being told that like where you're at right now, you're a shoe-in to be like a top pick. And again, he's playing transition, like he's getting half court passes from his teammates. So I think that style of play might have something to do with it. And one last thing I want to mention offensively for him is that he is getting reps off of the ball. Like, I feel like a lot of the dialogue that have come into the year was about how on-ball dominant that Amen is going to be, and that it's just him dribbling and everybody else working around him. I think OTE has actually done a pretty decent job of, splitting reps between him and other teammates. And also that when he shares the floor with some of their better players, it's not always in his hand. Like, they do a good job of running him in motion to help get him the ball. And I think that's going to be key for his early success, is going to be, if you're not a great shooter, like running in off of actions, getting the ball on DHOs, just constantly applying pressure, I think, is going to be a way that he can improve. And then you mention this all the time, Maxwell, as he gets stronger, like, who's to say that he's going to be limited playing a point guard position, right? Like, there might be some creative ways to hide the weaknesses. And there's also, like we mentioned, a chance that the weaknesses can get better.
Well, yeah, and like the strengths are still so strong, which I think is like the important thing to keep in mind. It's like,
exactly,
there are very few athletes like this, and there are very few athletes, especially on defense, that just like read things as quickly as he does. And on offense too, like, don't get me wrong, like, he reads plays on offense as well, and he's super creative, but like defensively, it's just unbelievable. Like, he's such a great defender and so fun to watch on that end. So yeah, like, I do still think he's the guy you take high in the draft.
Yeah. And defensively too, like
Um,
he's great when he's locked in, but like if it's
yeah,
like there are times where you could tell that he's playing in the overtime league.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that he's like almost 20 years old, and that he's older than a lot of these guys, like by
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Ausar Thompson. I like if I was just negative right now, like don't worry because we're about to get real positive. I came away really liking what I see from Ausar
Same.
Thompson. I think he's going to leap a men on my board. Um, so let's start with the shot since we were just talking about it. Um, Ausar did get better at shooting, and like weirdly,
Mm-hmm.
he's still like not great at the free throw line, but just purely from like an aesthetics and mechanical standpoint, his 3-point shot looks better. He's taking a good amount of them. He's taking 3.7 per game. Some teams are daring him a little bit, but not quite to the same extent that a Ben is. Um, so it still might be a thing where he comes into the NBA and has like a really poor opening year shooting the three. That could be. But I just love that it clearly looks much different. It is so much smoother than it was a year ago. Like there's been real growth, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, from Ausar Thompson as a catch and shoot jump shooter.
Yeah.
To the Drew Gooden suit thread point, like mid range, still real iffy.
Yeah.
His touch of the basket is better. He's about 58% of the basket. I think he's much less averse to contact than Amen is. And it
Yeah.
shows up two places. It shows up there and it shows up like competing defensively around the basket, especially in terms of rebounding. He's not as thirsty to get into transition as Amen is. And the other big improvement, and this is the biggest thing that Ausar has added to his game, I think I think they're both very good defenders. And I think they're both like really quick to recognize things and get into position on that end. I think the difference was on offense that Amen could play at like really high speeds and see stuff really quickly. And I think Ausar was
Yeah.
always just like a little bit slower on the draw and like still like very fast for a player his age and his size, like really, really good
Mm-hmm.
for a 6'7" player his age. But now he is playing a lot more fluid. He still has the handle of getting a little bit loose, but I think he's more dangerous with the handle. I think his footwork is better with the ball in his hands. And he's doing more live dribble passing with his right. And he's just doing more on the go as a passer. He's not needing to slow down. He's not needing to come to a jump stop. So now that like the passing isn't that far behind a men, it's like, okay, well, here's a guy that where I feel better about the jump shot. I feel better about how he deals with physicality. I feel better about his attentiveness. So like, is that margin really that big that like, why don't I just pick the safer of the two? If we're just talking about like the overtime elite prospects, like, why don't I just take the one that's like a little bit safer? Um, and that, yeah, I guess that's the question I'll ask you. Like, what is the case for Amen over Ausar, and are you seeing those same improvements that I'm seeing?
Well, I mean, like when we get to a certain point on the board, safer is obviously like the I would say the better way to go. But I mean, if
Yeah.
we're, I'm not there. I don't know where you're at on your new board. Like I can't wait to read your new piece. I don't have guys like both top 5 guys. I have like
Okay.
I'm in 6, and I think I got to start like 7 or 8. Like from
Okay.
last I looked, I think maybe a minus 5. I don't know. I've been
Mhm.
tinkering a lot as well, but I don't have either top 5. Ausar has impressed me. Like I'll lead off with that. I came away with him significantly higher on my board coming out of it than I did going in. Right. So the thing why I wanted to stress not comparing Amen to Ausar is because I really didn't want to do this with Ausar to Amen, because I think that Amen has been the measuring stick to Ausar's success, and I don't necessarily think that's in his best interest. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like because he is a better shooter than Amen, a lot of people are saying like, well, he's a good shooter, and it's just like
Mhm.
he's still got a lot of work to go on his jumper, but because he's better than Amen, people are saying that he is a
All
better
right. Oh, it's
player.
there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that he's arrived as a shooter, and
Hmm.
I I don't see that the case. And here's the thing I'll say about that. It's important, in my opinion, for Ausar to be a better 3-point shooter coming in than I think it is for Amen, because Amen is
I
more
agree.
adept as playing as a ball handler and applying more pressure on the rim. And it's not to say that Ausar isn't a good ball handler or a good passer, but I don't think that they're particularly close in that regard. Like Ausar is safer. And I think that that's because he is understanding of his limitations as a ball handler. I would say the same thing as a passer. Like Ausar does make good reads. Like he has very good connective ability. But if we're talking about just like one for one, like where they're at skill wise, I think Amin is a better ball handler by a good amount, and I think that he is a better passer by a good amount. Ausar is showing enough connective ability as a passer and a ball handler, but the shooting isn't there. And if he's going to be an off-ball guy, that's just that's predominantly a defender with some connective ability, but a below-average shooter, like that's much more concerning. And now I'm considering like, is that necessarily safe? Where you do have him in who is a stronger ball handler and a stronger passer, who if he does improve as a shooter, now you're talking about like potentially like a top 40 to 35 player in the NBA. Whereas Ausar, I don't necessarily see him having that level of a ceiling. So role-wise, where they're going to be, I don't necessarily think that Ausar is as much as a safe prospect as he is being made out to be. But I still think relative to his peers that he is a top 10 prospect, if that makes sense, right? Like it's much more important.
Yeah, I get you.
It's much more important that he is a better shooter than Amin because of the role that he's going to be expected to play. And the shot's just not really there.
Yeah, I think the one thing that Ausar is going to have working for him is that if you look at a lot of other players in this same kind of tier of the draft, they're all guys that he is like a better athlete than, and it's a lot of other guys that are struggling with their shot. So it is guys like Cam Whitmore, right? Who's like also really struggling to find his stroke. It's a guy like an Anthony Black who like is hitting, but like nobody really feels that great about it. Yeah. And again, like Ausar is the better athlete out of the two. Same with like a Jarris Walker, where like Jarris is probably like a more fundamentally sound defender, but like in terms of athleticism, it's not particularly close. And it's another guy where it's like, well, the percentage is good, but like the volume is basically half of what Ausar is taking. And granted, the competition's better.
But he's not getting opportunities like Ausar is either. I hate that, by the way.
But yeah, like it's a lot of other guys like have those similar questions, and he has the athletic edge over them. So I do think that, yeah, like relative to his peers, the case for him is still rather strong. I guess the big difference is just where we feel about him as a distributor. Because yeah, like he's never really been labeled a point the same way that Amin has. And
do you feel like if you're drafting Ausar, like this is, I think, where the evaluation comes, like, and this might be a fault on my end. And I have these two like neck and neck. They're much more closer now than they have ever been to me. And I don't have the door shut that Ausar can't jump him in. But what is Ausar's NBA role? Like if you're drafting him, and I don't know where you have him on your board, but if you have him 3, like, or you have him like where I do,
he's probably going to be 3.
Okay, so if he's 3, what's his NBA role? Like if you're drafting him, say I don't know, Charlotte drafts him and he's playing next to Ball, and he's what's his role?
He is ultimately a like slashing 3 that you occasionally run plays for, where it's like there are plays where he is the initiator. He's a guy that grabs and goes, and you run like early offensive sets through. Like you run like, hey, he grabbed the board, like have a big rim run, have the other big run, set a drag screen and pop, like just really simple, like grab and go early offense type stuff. Like you let him do that. Because I think that's where he's going to have a lot of success, right? Is transition and early offense. Like the longer that the shot clock ticks, like the more difficult it's going to become for him. Otherwise, I think you're looking at maybe he comes off screens like a secondary option, or he's attacking a defense after LaMelo has run a pick and roll and defenders have had to move and now they're out of position. So now you hit him from the slot or from the corner, and then he's attacking a defense. It's already been compromised to a point. And then you're hoping that he can catch and shoot out of the corner. So I think it's something like that, which is not like the most exciting offensive role for a number 3 pick, and because you're still counting on a lot of development to happen to get him where you want to be. But I see him being that kind of a player initially.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of like the role that I see him in too. And I think that that's where draft philosophy comes in too, right? Like, do you want to go safe at 3, or do you want to go for maybe a player with a higher superstar upside? And I think that Ausar does have like all-star, like there is a world where he could be like a like an Andrew Wiggins, like maybe 1 or 2 time All-Star in the NBA and still be a really good player. And he was drafted number 1 overall, right? So like there's a case to be made that he should be higher on my board. And he has gradually made his way up there. I just struggle with as a shooter, and I don't trust him to come in and be a playmaker or like a ball dominant scorer. Where do I place him? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of where I'm at on him.
That's fair. That's fair. So that'll wrap the OTE talk. So from here we're gonna go a little bit quicker just because these guys are lower down our boards. Up next is a guy that I'm like really considering doing a feature on because I feel like I'm like the one guy at No Ceilings that really likes him. And we are pretty far. Another guy we're pretty far apart on, Leonard Miller, for the G League Ignite. I like Leonard Miller. I think that there are very obvious flaws to Leonard Miller's game. I think I might have mentioned on the last year, like there was a possession where and I wrote about it in my column. There was, I think it was the game against the Clippers where he had the ball. He's got a small on him. And the obvious thing for him to do is like, he's a very efficient 2-point scorer.
Yeah.
Get the guy in the post, take him inside, get a look, maybe get to the free throw line. He's been a pretty efficient, free throw shooter. 77% at the line this season. And you make one, you get 2 points in the G League. Instead, he calls for a ball screen, gets a switch, gets a bigger defender on him, and then launches a 3. And in the games, again, this is through Instats, this is including those Metropolitans games, 26.8% from 3. It's just like, what are you doing, man? What is this? But as a whole, this is a player who is very productive in the G League. He is scoring. So Leonard Miller, 6'10", 19 years old, 14.5 points per game, just about 9 rebounds per game, 1.7 assists to 2.3 turnovers, 1.1 steals, 0.6 blocks, shooting splits of 48.5, 26.8, 77.1. So with Leonard Miller, we're ultimately talking about an energy forward who can put the ball on the ground a little bit, has flashes as a playmaker, has become, I would say, like comfortably for the G League, a pretty good on-ball defender. Off-ball defense is still very inconsistent. I would say it's better than it was, but there are still some very bad breakdowns that occur on his watch. There are very bad turnovers that occur on his watch. He is a very like possession by possession player at this stage, where sometimes like you just want to rip your hair out, and other times you're like, oh, I see the vision here.
Very frustrating watch.
Yeah. So you have really dug into a lot more Ignite film lately. Where are you kind of at? Where were you at on Leonard Miller coming in? Because I think you were lower. And do you feel any better after this kind of recent deep dive that we've all done?
I do feel better, but the bar was lower, so all I had to do was step over it. Now it's up a little higher. I've already talked, I feel like a good bit on where I see him struggling. Like is he a floor spacer? No. Like, is he going to be a playmaker? No. Like, his handle,
especially not initially, I think is the thing. Because I think that's the thing. Is like, if you want to talk yourself into like the passing flashes, it's like, okay, well, what is he going to have to do first in order to get the ball in his hands more? Because teams don't just give you the ball because you have passing flashes in the G League. Like, that's not how it works. So you got to develop some other skills first before a team trusts you like that.
Even I think a team like, and the fact that you're saying that, Maxwell, and I think that you have like a mid to late first on him somewhere in that neighborhood,
he's like, I think around like 20-ish.
Yeah. Which, I've seen significantly higher, right? But if you're taking him at 20, like you said, you're not taking him to be like an offensive hub, despite the fact that NBA offenses do actually enjoy running offense through their bigs now. He's not the best passer, although in the Clippers game, he did have a sweet dime to City Sissoko, which I loved. Here's my thing, Maxwell, and I think that we could just kind of steer the conversation in this regard. What are you drafting him for? Because I know that you said that he is like an A to B prospect to you, which I would love to know 2 things like from you, and this would help my evaluation a lot. How do you how do you assess an A to B player? Like if you're watching
Yeah,
him like in the
yeah.
middle, he's at like 8.5 right now, right? So
Yeah,
so
yeah.
how do you assess an 8.5 player? And then what's
Mhm,
his ultimate role in the NBA that you want to take him as high as you are
mhm.
right now?
For sure. So with Leonard Miller, and I've said this like a lot, like in our group chat, I think ultimately like so let's go to the A to B player first.
Yes.
What I want to see is what I have seen, which is I want to see more of the flashes as a passer. I want to see more, and I want to see more consistency as a defender, especially off the ball. Because he was like a disaster defensively prior to this Ignite season. Um, so it's really just one of those, like, it stinks because like with so many players, like guys that we're like wishy-washy on, like we can kind of just look at box scores a lot of the time to just be like, do I
Yeah.
need to watch this guy? Nah, I'm just gonna kind of like keep him at arm's distance. And then like
Yeah.
once the draft comes here, if he declares, then I'll dive into the film. Where like, with Leonard Miller, it's like I need to keep a running tally on like what's happening. Like I need to check back every couple games and be like, how are you rotationally? Are you getting when you are weak side? Are you sliding in to help at the basket? Like all these like little things. It's not stuff that you can get from a box score. It's literally just you
No.
got to watch the games and see like,
Intangible. Yeah.
is he doing dumb stuff less? And often yes. And like when I say dumb stuff, like I don't mean that in like any sort of derogatory sense. He's a guy who's not played a lot of high level basketball. This guy
Yeah.
came from like being a guy who was 6'4" to a guy who had a massive growth spurt and played like pretty high level Canadian basketball in
Yep.
high school to then like now he's just on the G League Ignite. So it has been a whirlwind and he's getting used to a new body. So like him making mistakes is not expected. It's like not only expected, it's like encouraged. Like he's got to play
Yeah.
through this stuff, and it's why I love him with the Ignite. So I think yeah, the A to B thing is just like I need to see less of the bad and more of the good. For his role, I think a team needs to have a plan that takes him. Like I think if a
Yeah.
team takes him that is like serious about competing and like wants him to play right away, you've got to have a coach that's going to be understanding of what his background is and what he can be going forward. So I think the ideal situation is something like he lands on a team that is either like pretty committed to rebuilding or is not in a situation to be competitive yet. Or even like if you look at a team like I'm trying to just like think of teams off the top of my head, like teams like Indiana or Utah, where
Yeah.
it's like we're not like deliberately being bad. We would like to win games, but like we're gonna let young guys do their thing.
Multiple first
Um,
round picks. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like those are the type of teams where like I think if they take him and say either like we're going to commit to just playing you on the Ignite for a year, or like we're going to play you as an energy big man. We're going to give you a couple chances a game to orchestrate a handoff and just see how that goes. Like that's I think the ideal role for him is just like bring him in low maintenance, make sure you really are on your P's and Q's defensively, crash the offensive glass, get some putbacks, roll to the rim after screens, cut when the cutting lane is there, and like that's it. Like I'm looking at him exclusively as a guy to defend, rebound, and play finish out of the gate on that type of a team. And then you hope that like the passing flashes come along, he develops the outside shot, and then he's a guy that can reliably run handoffs both as like a playmaker for others and a guy where like if you sag on the handoff, he's just going to take the three. Like ideally, like that's what you hope. You hope that he becomes that and a plus defender, and that's a really good player. Like if you have a guy who's 6'10", you can run the occasional offensive set through. I don't think he'll ever be like a Sabonis level passer, but like
Yeah.
that type of thing on occasion where it's like you can run some wheel actions around him and like he can be an offensive hub and he can finish inside. And then on defense, like he's able to cover multiple positions. He's able to give you some extra rim protection and he can lock a guy down because he's so big.
You want him
That's
to
like what you're
be
really
Daniel
striving
Tice,
for.
kind of, is what you're.
Yeah, exactly. Like that,
Yeah.
that kind of defensive player. I think that's what you hope for, but I think you really start small with the role. I think it's like really critical that you start small with the offensive role.
Okay. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm struggling with placing him because it's like if you got to put that much into a player and like you're not sure of like where the ceiling is, like how much more surface level there is to scratch there. Like I do love that he competes on the glass. He's solid in transition and he's got some funk to his ball handling and good mid-range
Mm-hmm.
game. Like there are some real positives to him. I was just curious because I know you talk about A to B, and I thought that this would be an excellent time to kind of talk about that with such a prospect as Leonard Miller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that like, yeah, I think there's a lot of good in there, but I think like the reason the Ignite was such a good fit is just because like he does make a ton of mistakes. And that's why I mentioned like those type of teams specifically. Like he needs
Yes.
a coach and that's why I think minimizing the role is so important too, because like
Mm-hmm.
you don't want him to think that's okay. Like you don't want him to have too long of a leash where it's like you're allowed to just go out there and like make wild passes or get like really crazy attacking the basket. I think that's like the way to do it. So let's move on to his teammate real quick, CD Sissoko, a guy you really
Yeah.
liked coming into the year, a guy I was a little
Yeah.
more skeptical of, and probably the player who has moved up and down my board more dramatically more times than anybody else. Steven, I'm having a really hard time with the CD Sissoko
Yeah.
assessment. Like I'm just like kind of lost with him in general. What have you seen from City and like where are you at with him right now?
So I got a question for you, and then I'll dive in.
Yeah.
What position do you see him playing in the NBA if it all works out?
Probably the 3. I think you hope that he shoots well enough that he's like a 2-3, where it's like, yeah, you can just like count on him to hit a shot and like he initiates sometimes.
Yeah, so the
Because he
more
doesn't
that
really
I've
rebound.
watched, no, but he's very strong. He is
He
a very
is.
strong player, and he's got good frame. And if we're talking about like time in going to the G League being a smart move for him, CD's still very young. And for whatever reason, like the evaluation that I hear from him, it it almost feels like that he was expected to come in as like such a finished product. You know what I mean? And like he's still a very young man. He's very strong, can absorb contacts on both sides of the ball, appears to be versatile on the defensive end. And this is what I love about him is that if I'm looking at him more as a 4, which it was not my evaluation coming in, but
Interesting. Okay.
watching him play in the Ignite when he's capable on the boards. I went in a strong suit, especially whenever Leonard Miller is like averaging like 10 or 11 rebounds per game.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's gobbling up a lot of boards himself. But I think that if you look at him as a 4 that is positionally versatile on the defensive end with playmaking ability and passing, because if you watch him in transition, you look at the passes he makes, he's not efficient from everywhere on the floor, but it looks like the 3-point shot isn't as much as a project as I was expecting it to be coming in. Like he's showing signs that there is some floor spacing ability into his game. And if the ball is swung to him and the defense is caught rotating, he can attack, he can absorb and finish through contact as well. Just watched one of the Clippers games before we started recording, and he actually drove and dunked on somebody, which I was not expecting to see at this point in the season. So there are concerns though, Maxwell. Like the passing is very daring on a lot of possessions, especially when Scoot was gone. And if we're talking about roster construction for some college teams, like the G League team was very much built about around Scoot being the initiator. Like they were not counting on City and Mojave to come in and be offensive hubs. And I think that that's given City growth and reps to improve in that area, but that's not what I think that his role is going to be. I'm starting to look at him as a 4, particularly in like a 5-out type of system. Yeah, because again, very strong, very defensively versatile.
Yeah, like so many of my notes on him are just about like his frame, his body, his strength and length and ability to wall off drives. Like there's so much of that in my notes for him. So I get it. I'd like to see the rebounding come around more, but to your point, like they've got other rebounders, play Eric Miko a lot, who's like big, Scoot rebounds above his weight for his position. So you can explain it away if you want to. I think the one other thing that CD would have working in his favor on that front is the fact that like he knows how to protect the rim from the weak sides. Like if you are playing him at the 4, like that instinct is already kind of built in there.
And he's not afraid of contact either.
No. I think that like to your point, the shooting I think it's going to be the big question mark. And I think it's really going to affect like where he lands. And again, it's one of those things where it's important to remember, like he is shooting them from NBA range in the G League. So 31.4, it's not great, but if he was, shooting 31.4% in college, would we maybe feel a little bit better about it? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of guys shooting around that range that are really high on boards that don't have some of the other things that CD has and are not playing at the same level of competition that he is. So if you want to talk yourself into him, you could say that. Really active defender, very disruptive on that end. Offensive, like there is stuff to like. Like he can do some really nice stuff with the ball as a passer. His post entries are always like very sharp, very well delivered. He can be a little wild at top speed.
Yes,
Like when he
very
is
much.
playing too fast, like it can get really ugly. So he's got to just settle down a little bit. But again, like he is very young, and I don't know why. I feel like he doesn't get that same benefit of the doubt. I don't know if it's just he's played longer than a guy like Leonard Miller, but maybe I should be a little bit more fair to CD as far as like what he's working through as far as
I
his,
forget that he's only like 18, 19 years old because he also
yeah.
does have like that pro level experience overseas before coming to the G League.
Well, and like he just looks like he's 24, like physically.
Yes.
Like he has a body of a 24-year-old. Like most guys who are his age are like really scrawny or underdeveloped. Like you look at Jaden Hardy, who was older than him when he played on the G League night. It's like, oh yeah, like he's still got some baby fat on him. Like he's not that quick or whatever. Like CD is built like a man already at 18.
Yes.
So that is a big difference. So let's move on to our last kind of like big name on the docket. We might touch on some other guys real quick, but
Sure.
Nikola Jurisic, who is playing for Mega in Croatia as part of the Adriatic League. He was a guy who was really highly touted coming into the year. I believe he was like top 20, top 25 for me coming into the year. Yeah. 6'8", sort of guard forward type, point forward, if you want to say that. So let's just do the numbers first.
Yeah.
11 points per game, 2.6 assists to 2 turnovers. So like positive assist to turnover ratio at that size, 2.6 assists a game, real good. He's not blocked a shot on the season. 1.1 steals per game, 2 rebounds per game, which like again, like kind of low for the size.
Okay.
Let's do the shooting splits now.
This almost broke our group chat the other day when I was just like, hey, did anyone see that you're shooting worse than Thompson from deep right now?
Yeah, so this is using the in-stat data. 38.7 from the field, 69.2% from the free throw line, and 10% from 3 on 3.8 per game. So he's taking them. Can't say he's not taking them. Yeah. And he's not like a busted jumper guy. And like he
looks pretty. Can't explain it.
No, it's like it's a real Jalen Hood Shafino situation where like you'd watch the high school tape and like the 3-point numbers were disastrous, and you watch the shot and you're like, I kind of like that shot. Like I don't hate the shot. His is probably prettier than JHS's was for sure too. So if we can rip off the Tylers real quick, where's your panic meter with the Nikola Jurisic at this stage?
Man, ripping off the Tylers, that's a lot. 6.5.
Okay,
like that's kind of where I'm at with where I was coming into the season and what I'm seeing now. There's some good things to like, but I'm thinking positionally, like I know that he's dealt with injury, which Rucker was, very quick to remind us, and that was something that I needed a reminder on. And Corey, shout to him. Big fan of, by form over efficiency numbers, especially on the number of games that he's played in, which I believe is only like 8 games or something
it's
like
low.
that.
Yeah.
Very low number. So the shooting, all it takes is, 2-3 really good shooting games, and then that percentage is up, right? I'm nervous because it's not what I was expecting to see, if that makes sense.
I agree. Yeah.
He competes
I was
very
not
hard
him
on
to be.
Yeah, but I will tell you the one thing, maybe I overreacted. I'll call it a clean 5. My panic meter is a clean 5 because I wasn't expecting the defense to be as good as it is now, especially navigating screens.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would probably have my panic meter a little bit higher as far as like a this year guy. And that's the thing. He's young. Like this is a dude who could like has several years if he does not want to put his name in this year. So like for this year, I'm probably at like a 7.5 just because I think it's really hard for teams to talk themselves into a guy that is shooting 10% from 3. And again, it is 8 games that we have for in-stat data. So that, like you said, it could change in a hurry. He has, one game where he's 5 for 5 and he's like doubled the number of threes that he's hit on the year. So it could be as simple as that. I'm with you on the defense. I think the defense is a lot better than I expected. I thought in the games that I'd seen of him prior to this season, he told on himself with his feet a lot. Like he would sag way more than it felt like he needed to, and he'd give up really easy looks. And like he would do the Jovic sometimes where it's like, I'm just going to foul if you drive at me at all. Like if
I have that in my
you try to
notes,
make
too.
me slide my feet, I'm going to foul you. Like
F
do
that, I'm
not
out.
make me slide my feet. But yeah, he's really moving better defensively. On the shot, he does take it quick and confident. So like I do think
Yes.
that's something that he can do. It's why I would be confident like that, and the fact that he's taking him off of movement too. There's a real level of fluidity on defense. The last thing that I want to see, two things. The passing is like a big part of his game. It's like a big selling point. Like he's really creative with what he can see and what he can deliver as a passer. I think he premeditates his drive sometimes, and there'll be instances where like he goes into a spin move and it's like, oh, you decided you're going to do that spin move like 4 seconds ago. Like there's a guy who was just standing in the way and you still went with the spin move and now you lost the ball. So like some of his turnovers just feel like it's easy stuff where it's like you're just leaving that on the table, and that can just play more loose because he has the fluidity to do it. I think it's just a matter of like getting more comfortable and getting used to being more improvisational with the ball in his hands against pro competition. And then the last thing is, like we mentioned, the rebounding. He needs to make sure he boxes out around the basket because like he gives up some second chances, or like he'll lose his man and then his man gets the second chance opportunity. Like that type of stuff is just a very irritating flaw that like, I can't have that. I can't have the turnovers, and I can't have you shooting like this. Like I need, if some of those other things are further along, maybe it wouldn't bother me as much, but he should be rebounding better than he is. The shot, I don't like think you can really do anything about it. There's no easy fix. I think time in and of itself will take care of that, whether it's this year or further down the road. But the premeditated driving is the other thing that I'm really frustrated with him.
Yeah, and I think that too, when we were talking about him in the group chat, was that he's kind of predictable too as a ball handler in the sense that if he's driving right, I think that he has a really good chance to get to the bucket and finish it with a clean pass. If he's driving left, he is not really looking to go to the basket. Some of his passes coming through that angle are a little bit more wild. And even when he goes left, he's also looking to go immediately back to the right. So if we're looking at him as like a combo perimeter playmaker, cutting off half of the court on him is going to make his life a heck of a lot harder at the next level. But dude, he's so young, like you said.
He is.
I said my panic meter's at a 5. I think I slid him back like maybe 5 or 6 spots because of where I'm seeing the areas of concern on him now and how other players have just played better than my expectations. It's just the song and dance that we're at the time of the year right now. So I haven't sold out on him as like a draftable prospect or anything like that, but there are more glaring concerns, and hopefully with more games coming down the line, some of those areas get addressed quickly.
So those were like the big names that we wanted to touch on. Those are the guys that I feel like most places are projecting to be drafted. They're generally guys that are in the top 60. Are there any other international guys that you want to like touch base on, or that have caught your eye at all, or anything like that?
I mean, we've talked about a good number of them. You know, James Aji, when we did the international dive, I think that he's a fine player. Still a lot of concerns with him, consistency, strength, translating over to the NBA at his position, I think is going to give him problems. But he moves his feet very well. Has excellent, ball tracking ability and timing on his blocks. I think rebounding is going to be a good strong point for him. Offensively, I'm kind of curious if he can do anything other than being a lob threat. But on some systems, that's really all you need his position to do. So I have him kind of as a mid to late second right now. And then, Ndiaye hasn't really done anything yet, but I still want to believe in the tools of his game. I was a big Marcia guy too. Whenever he was going through draft cycles and stuff like that. And I specifically just held on to him because of his tools and his motor. I think Ndiaye still has the potential to be able to do something, but it's really into it this year. And then our favorite point guard in the draft cycle, Juan Nunez, is a guy whose name I consistently still see. And I want to be nice and just say that he is a fine point guard.
Yeah, I felt like really, because like we've been the downer on him like pretty consistently, and I like his name has started to fade from the conversation, and I think that's fine. And like again, it's the same thing we said about him the last time that he was brought up. Like he's young, like he does not need to enter the draft this year. I think he's got like 3 more years. Like just keep developing, man. Like there's no rush. If a team takes him as a stash, there are probably other guys I'd rather stash, but like there's no rush. And Dye was someone that you mentioned, like I want to touch on. So this is a guy. He is 6'10". He's playing on Baskonia's 3rd league team in Germany. So the level of competition, I believe it's their 3rd league team. Level of competition is very poor. It is like a wild watch. Like he is all over the place. He is way too 3-point happy. Like he loves to just launch the 3. Like there are so many times where it's like, you know, you could just like drive to the basket on this, and it's just like he's already launched a 3. Defensively, he's really raw, but like the tools are so interesting. Like he looks so big out there, and he can move, and like the jumper, like his percentages are really bad. Like the jumper is really clean when he takes off the catch. He's just pulling too many off the dribble, and it's submarining like both his field goal percentage because he takes so many of them, and his 3-point percentage. And like inside, like he like there'll be times where he gets a smaller guy on him, and he'll post him up and hit a nice hook shot over him. And it's like, oh boy, like there we go, we're in business, and he can make some solid basic reads as a passer, and just like, hey, someone came to help and he hit the open man. Like there's enough glimpses that you can talk yourself into it, but he is so far from being a finished product. Like I would love him as a 2nd round stash, depending on the situation, but like 100% not a guy that you take and you're like, get over here, let's start the clock on that contract. Like not going to be that kind of guy, but like still very intriguing as a stash, because like all these habits are things that should be fixable. Like it's like, just don't take as many bad shots. Like the defense, like that's just going to be a matter of experience. Like if the work rate is there, it'll come around. Like he's so intriguing still. That I think there's a real path for him.
I got one more, Fedor Zugic. I forgot to mention him too. You know, just the flamethrower, right?
Yeah, I have not watched an game in a while, just because like him and like the fact that like Nunez hasn't really been great, and like I feel like Zugic just like the buzz isn't there. Like when I like make my like watch schedule for the week, like buzz does play a factor. Like if I'm just not hearing a ton about a guy, I don't necessarily go out of my way to watch him. I think Zugic is still really interesting long term, just because the level of like movement shooting that he can do. But like, has he done much as of late? Or
I don't know. I haven't watched much of him since my first round. But name that I wanted to bring up for the listener, and this might be something that we can take as homework coming into the next episode.
So it does look like his minutes have trailed off. So like early in the year, he had like an 18-point game, a 17-point game. The last 4 games, it's been 4 points, 1 point, 6.2 points. So it looks like, and he's 26.4% from 3, where like the shot is like the big thing for him. So like, and like, this is one of those things, like when you're projecting NBA role, like this is a guy, like when he has a cold stretch, because the rest of that game just isn't all the way there yet, like he could really find himself out of a rotation pretty quickly. So it's a shame, because I like him. Like he's very fun when he is on, but it might just be further down the road for him, because he's also still really young. Like I think if he'd gone in last year, he would have been like the youngest guy in the draft. So no rush for him at all.
Absolutely. But yeah, those were the only international guys that I had, man. But this was a fun exercise. I'm glad that we were able to have the long awaited Thompson talk on Draft Deeper. I think that was the most extensive we've dove into them.
Yeah, that was a real good time. I'm glad that we did it, and I want to thank all the listeners for coming along on this journey with us. Always, if we leave us feedback, find us on Twitter, get at us. Nathan is at Draft Deeper on Twitter. I will plug his stuff. I am at Boundboard. Steven, you were at Steven G Hoops, correct?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. And let him know what you just put out this week at NBA.com or Substack, which you should be subscribed to if you're not already.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting, I won't even say how I feel about it. Like, we've been getting a lot of buzz lately, Maxwell, from our fans. It's just like very humbling words about how they're enjoying the content. But yeah, I just had a piece drop on UCF's Taylor Hendricks, who didn't even include it in the breakdown. It's just like how it broke down from when I got it written to when it edited and when it posted. Didn't even include how well he played against Houston, which big test for him, man. Like he looked
huge.
it was a very great game, and we were like making comments like, dude, like Houston might eat him alive, and
Yeah, yeah,
he
we were
was
worried
great,
about that matchup.
and he showed out. So well timed article, a lot of good content in there. I dove in about how the evolution of the NBA, and shout out to Spins because this is trailing his article that he released about a week or so ago about the the power forward spot and how he's looking at it. I actually messaged him on the
Mm.
side and was like, hey, I'm writing about power forwards a little bit too, but in a completely different direction. Like I'm talking about like modernized twin tower lineups where size is in so long as it's coupled with great skill. And I think that that's what Taylor Hendricks is bringing to the NBA. Great 3-point shooter, great defender, budding playmaker, competes on the glass. When he gets stronger, a lot of his weaknesses are going to be not as weak anymore, which is great. So please go check that out. NoCeilingsNBA.com, free 99. By the time you're listening to this, Nathan's piece is going to
Mhm.
be released. And then Maxwell, you got a piece that I can't wait to dive into, man.
Yeah. So this week I am covering Noah Clowney, which was like a really interesting film dive for me because he's one of those guys where I feel like, and I feel like this is part of the reason I was so excited for your Taylor Hendricks piece as well, is a lot of these guys that just kind of like explode out of nowhere. I feel like people react to the stock a lot. Like people are like, oh, this guy's got to
Yeah.
go this high. Or like I'm holding out on this guy, but you don't get a lot of like thorough analysis of like, what is this guy's game? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
is the game here? What is there? What's still yet to come along? I really enjoyed digging deep into Noah Clowney because there were some things that were flaws, and I'm like, oh, that's like a pretty easily fixable thing.
Mm-hmm.
There were some areas where I was just like really encouraged about the way that he plays the game. So really, really excited to get that one kind of hammered out. Started on it today. I'll have that finished up tomorrow, and it'll be up on our Substack on Tuesday. And like I said earlier, a lot of big board changes. The expanding big board, there's going to be quite a bit of movement there. This draft is starting to feel really open for me, so I'm going to kind of dive into that, and of course, quick hits as always. So
I
that's what
can't
we've
wait
got
to
coming
see
down the
that, man.
pipe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Nathan's
So
piece,
thank
by
you
the
all.
time everyone's listening to this today, is
Yes.
covering Nick Smith, who just got hurt. And I'm sure he's going to give you a lot of good reasons to remember his name.
Yeah. Nathan has been really all over the Nick Smith thing. So he's done a lot of work on his high school film, obviously before the season, and now kind
Yeah.
of really thoroughly dove into those college games. And we might not see him again. So it's a really important piece because I think the Nick Smith discourse might get kind of carried away where it's like
Yeah.
we haven't seen him in a while and people just kind of like make stuff up or like write him off or they get, recency bias and slide him down. We're like, Nathan is going to go really deep in his game and kind of take you through all that. And that's important to keep in mind moving forward, since that may be the last that we've seen of him.
Yeah. Very true.
So that is that. Thank you so much for joining us again. Please subscribe, both here and to the Substack if you have not already. Leave a 5-star review. It helps us out quite a bit. And we always appreciate you all listening into 2023. Hope you're all having a happy new year, and we'll see you guys next week.
Much love, y'all.